Welcome to user training for the Cloud DPE Development Studio. In this session, we will continue the setup of a couple of reference tables for some healthcare data we downloaded from the CMS website. If you remember, this is the data here. It contains provider information and services rendered information, the HCPCS code, the description for the services rendered, as well as some statistics about what CMS paid those providers for rendering those services. And the previous session, we set up a physician reference table so that we could remove all this redundant information from the statistical data on the utilization. And in this case, we want to do the same thing for the HCPCS data. So we want to set up a reference table for the HCPCS. We have to be concerned here about whether the description varies by HCPCS code. There's also something called a drug indicator, and we have to be concerned whether or not that also varies by HCPCS code. There's also a chance, of course, since we have merged 2 years here, that the description would be different from 1 year to the next. So the first thing we need to do is do a little data mining to determine if we have variance, if we need to consider, and make sure that we choose the correct descriptions, the best descriptions for the reference table that we set up. So I'm going to start a new seed, and I'm just going to call it CMS data mining 2. And now I will bring in the 2 years of data that we have here, a combined table. I do not want to add all columns. I will bring in the HCPCS code, the description, and the drug indicator. And sequence all 3 of these and do a union. So the first thing we're trying to determine is there any variation in the description or drug indicator for the HCPCS code. We're going to accept an output table here, accept the default name for the output table, and now we'll run this process. The second thing we want to do is then add a new process. We can do this while the other one is running, even though it shouldn't run quickly. Add the seed output. That's you don't have to wait till it finishes running, and we'll add all the columns. And actually, we did need to add all the columns. We can actually delete 2 of these because we would just want to summarize. We want a union on the HCPCS code only. Okay, here's the tables finished. So you can see, looking down here, we don't see any obvious HCPCS codes that are repeated where there are multiple descriptions, so it's not obvious, but oh, here's one here. Now this is interesting because this is actually a mistake in the spelling of one versus the other, which is really not a problem. Of course, we'd like to get the one with the right spelling, but that's not entirely necessary for our purposes, and so we'll have to work on that later. But first of all, let's just determine how many variations we do have. Now we know we're going to have at least one variation of description within the HCPCS code. So in process 2, again, I'm going to go ahead and delete the description, do a union here, and bring in and create a small integer field, which is a count, and we can call it, just for the heck of it, dupes. So these are the number of duplicate rows with duplicate codes in it. We have a union set up. We're going to do a subtotal of 1. You can also done a count. Subtotal is fine either way. Accept the default output name for the most part. And then we're going to put a filter on this that says dupes greater than 1. So this will just take a couple. We're going to run just this process. So this will just take a couple seconds to run. And here we see we have 190 situations where the HCPCS code has 2 values of either the description or the drug code. So now we need to find out what those are. And we're going to add another process. This is very similar to what we did when we were setting up the physician reference table. Going to add the seed output. First, we're going to add the seed output table we just created with the duplicates, the code with duplicates on it. And now we're going to add another seed output table. We're going to add the first one, which has our union that we did in the first process. We're going to add all the descriptions, the description, the drug indicator, and so on. Go back here. Oops, I'm sorry. And then we're going to add the HCPCS code. And we can also add the dupes in. It'll just fall to the bottom. Sequence this and do an extract rows command. Add an output. And run this process. So this will give us is 380 rows because we had in fact 190 duplicates, and there were none that had 3. All of them had 2, which might have been the difference by year, but we'll see. We'll find that out later on. When we look at some of the differences here, we can see that a lot of them are either misspellings or different spellings, or different ways of abbreviating, or different, let's see, look on further down here, we can see maybe different capitalizations, and maybe a hyphen where there isn't a hyphen in one of the other ones. So there's a number of things that could cause the differences. A lot of them are in fact meaningless, and like here's the capitalization and so on. So one of the things we can do is, if we decide to, we can just accept arbitrarily whichever one comes out of a union, as long as the difference is meaningless. But that needs to be reviewed. So first you need to go through and review these differences. But first of all, before we do that, I'd like to find out, are the differences due to the year? So I want to back up to process 1 and bring in the year here, and do a union on that, and then just run this process to create a new file, which is the temp file coming out of the first process, which ends in a 1. So that when I do that, I can now go to process 3, and without rerunning the second process, this is just something you can do during the data mining process. You wouldn't want to, of course, build the seed this way. But now I can, when I come to this part, I can bring in the year. Okay, let this finish. Okay, that finished. See, the year is attached to what we had before with those 3. So I'm going to bring in the year now from that table, which is the output of the first process. And now I'm going to run this again. And from there, we can see it did come out with 380, again, the record, 380 records, 380 rows. And if we look at this, it does appear that in most cases, the differences are by year. It's 12, 13, 12. It looks like almost all the differences are by year, so it's just a matter of whether or not we want to accept perhaps the most recent year as the corrected value or not. And going down here it is. And so it really needs to be reviewed in more detail, which is out of the scope of this session. But for now, we're going to assume, in fact, that it is the year. That's the difference. And we're going to further assume that the 2013 is the more accurate and more desirable description, being later. As you can see here, it would be the case here if we looked here. We're not sure the difference between the lower intestine and small bowel. Here we're going from a highly abbreviated form to something that's more descriptive. So, and then again, here the same thing. We're getting more description for the 2013. So for now, for this exercise, we're going to assume that 2013 has the better description. So now if we back up and we do a similar process that we did for the physician's the physician's reference file, we're going to keep this year in the first process, and now and simply actually what we want to do is in fact eliminate the sequencing. I did the same mistake again. I want to eliminate the sequencing, not the field. So I'll make this regular and this regular, and now run this again. In fact, let's just see, go to the temp reference file, look at data mining, look at the output of this process as it now exists. It has 11,932 records. If we remove the description of the drug indicator and run this process again, let's see if it also has 11,932 records. That would mean that all the differences are based on the year, and then it does indeed have that. And now we've got it set up so that for each HCPCS code, the second row for that HCPCS code is the one that has the most recent year. And so similar to the way we did the physician's reference file, we can now bring another process in, a new process here, and let's bring in that first, the output of that first process, add that in columns, and eliminate the year, union on a code, and output a table, and run this process. And with that, we now have a very adequate HCPCS reference table. And now what we need to do is rename the output tables. At this point, we don't have any reason to retain this part. I'll go ahead and save this like I have had before as the data mining process. We're going just for records. And now I'm going to remove 2 and 3 processes. So now we have the process 1 going out with the HCPCS code union with the year. Process the second process, which is actually called process 4 because that's what it was named in the beginning, doing a union on HCPCS code to give us the final reference table. So now it's just a matter of renaming these tables and saving this under a different name, and we will have at that point completed our HCPCS reference table build. So I'm going to go back to the healthcare, bring in the physician. I'm going to copy the physician reference and go back here and rename this table as a HCPCS reference. So that's, and then we run this process, which gives us our reference table, which is now, of course, in the, if we refresh this, we'll see the HCPCS reference here. Now what I want to do is then now save this, and maybe perhaps I want to also, let me change this and go back to the seed, and perhaps I want to change this process, remember, just to have a better name. So first we might want to say, let's just say rename here, union on HCPCS and year, and over here rename create HCPCS, whoops, HCPCS reference. Okay, and at this point we want to now save this under a different name. So we'll do a save as, and let's see, I think we're into a different area here. So I want to go to my training area, and I'm going to change this to now HCPCS reference. And now we have created a HCPCS reference seed that we can use if we need to bring in more data later. But for now, it's done the job for the data that we've downloaded for this round from the CMS website.